beer, it's good for you.
Hello and welcome to the video. Within this guide video I'll be sharing my recipe and methods for brewing my tried and tested recipe for what I am calling my Verdant Tropical Pale Ale. This beer recipe is the next one in my new series of videos where I'm sharing more recipes based around this very special Verdant IPA yeast. Just to bring you up to speed, apart from the recipes I released close to Verdant IPA's launch, I also shared an IPA recipe late last year, and this is the next one in that series. None of these recipes are similar in terms of hop or grain, but they do have this yeast choice in common, of course. So let's get to it. Let's now go through the steps in order. Here is a sneak preview of my recipe's vital statistics. This recipe offers an approximate 6% ABV beer and is simply bursting with tropical fruit flavours and then some, within a modern day pale ale recipe build. More on this later. This recipe, like all of my shared recipes, is written by me and can be found in full within the video's description, which is underneath the video window when viewed on a desktop computer. Like all of my shared recipes, this recipe is very tried and tested, so do brew it with confidence. You will also find the link to a full recipe in Brewfather, which can be used free of charge with some restrictions. For the very best results, and so that you are actually brewing the recipe as intended, I strongly suggest that your initial steps will be to convert the recipe before ordering in your ingredients. I have an easy guide to doing this on Brewfather on my channel as shown on screen now. Within this video, this recipe is being brewed using a Gen 4 Brewzilla 65 litre system to the volume of 20 litres, or approximately 5.28 US liquid gallons. But as part of the conversion process, this can be scaled and shaped to suit your own brewing system and volume requirements. Recipe conversion is an essential part of the process for the intended results. Do note that this applies to all recipes you will obtain from others, not just mine. I also strongly recommend that you plan your water profile ahead. After all, beer is mostly water and its balance is important. If you're a beginner, then you will be excused if you skip this for now, but this is certainly an important direction to move into for the very best results later on. Shown on screen is the water profile that I have used in developing this recipe, which is found on Brewfather, which is simply ideal for moving forward hop bitterness and dryness. If you have a hoppy profile that you prefer, then by all means use this instead, but certainly this is a popular one from Brewfather. Let's now move on to the brew itself, starting with the mash. This starts by gradually adding your milled grain into your preheated mash water. As you add, make sure that you stir the grain in well to get every grain wet before moving on to adding more. Once you have added all your grain, I suggest giving the whole mix a careful final breakup with your brewing paddle for at least 2 to 3 minutes. Personally, I call this finalising the mash. This time you spend now is simply one of the best brewing time investments you can make, as it will ensure that you're off to a head start for efficiency and brewing the beer as intended by your recipe. Once you have done this, you're ready to start the actual mash. Let's now add the top plate and the recirculation arm and start the pump. Once you have flow, you can then check the flow and the position of the top plate, ensuring that it is as even as possible to assist in a standard level of efficiency. This is not a video game where necessarily high scores are important, more a case of similar scores so that you can properly dial in your brewing efficiency with recipes. This is once again important so that you're brewing your recipe as intended. Once your mash is in full swing, initially it will be a little different to how it appears as it progresses. So as we look at the grain bill, I will show you these changes in the background video, but you will notice that it will start to clear. Do note though that if it doesn't, then this is not the sign of a bad beer ahead. It is simply usually just an indication of an overly fine grain crush or having things in your mash that promote a haze like wheat. Shown on screen now is our grain bill. This starts with Otter at 80% of our grist as our main fermentable source. This will certainly impart some more flavour compared with regular 2-mo malt, which is malty and nutty. Often it will also impart more colour and will offer a little more body too. If you cannot obtain it, then another specialty pale malt will work, or regular pale malt. The difference is not huge, but it's certainly nicer to have than to not, and gives this recipe's in beer some extra zing. Our Munich malt at 10% of the grist is also going to provide some extra malt flavour and aroma as well as some extra colour. At 10% it is fairly positive in this recipe and for good reason when it comes to this beer's flavour balance. Then at 5% we have wheat malt, which is there to add texture, body and head retention. Then finally also at 5% we have crystal malt, which is simply there for colour. So as much as this isn't a very complex grain bill, it isn't a basic 2-malt one either, like some of the recipes of the past for these types of styles. Consider this progression. Certainly recipe writing knowledge and the grain that we have to work with has all improved. I then moved on to the sparge, which I prefer the results of by doing manually rather than in batch for convenience. You will note some stray grain bits on the top plate here. This is certainly nothing to be concerned with. The main purpose of the sparge is to wash out sugars caught within our grain, so an even approach is important. Let's move on to our boil. This was a steamy one for me due to the time of year with the cold weather, as I'm sure you can see. Here I am stirring in the protein head to allow all the solids to drop down to the bottom of the brewing system. So here is some footage of this while we look at the boil profile. I have set this recipe in accordance with the modern boil time of 30 minutes, and naturally we will also enjoy the extra flavour and time saving that this provides. For more information about the modern boil time, check out my video as shown on the screen that runs through all of the details on how to rewrite those older recipes so that you can have a shorter boil and the same result. As you can see from the details on the right of our screen, the hop schedule starts at 15 minutes left of the boil, and you can see me adding this and giving these hops a good stir in now. For this recipe I'm using Nectaron and Mosaic, which I really love as a hop combination. Combining these two is truly worthy of this recipe's tropical name. Nectaron are from New Zealand and simply have huge aromas and flavours of passion fruit, peach, grapefruit and pineapple. These hops are really super dank and fruity. Mosaic offers a complex blend of floral, tropical, citrus and fruity flavours which include mango, tangerine, lime, peach, passion fruit and blueberry. For our 15-minute hopstand I used a fully copper immersion chiller to reduce down from boiling temperatures to 80 degrees Celsius or 176 degrees Fahrenheit. The technique used here was to stir the water around the chiller, and in almost no time the cooling was done. The immersion chiller was then removed and the brewing system was already set to maintain our hopstand temperature. As you can see, no main amount of hops are being added into this hopstand, in accordance with modern pale ales, where the main amounts of hops are added late to push forward flavour and aroma. Here you can see that I'm stirring in the hops to encourage the hop oil to amalgamate with our wort, and so that the hop debris falls to the false bottom of this brewzilla. If you are using an older brewing system without a false bottom, then I would recommend that you use a whirlpool here instead. Certainly having a false bottom is very useful as it takes care of separating the wort from the trub. I then started cooling with my counterflow chiller and started transfer into my fermenter. I like to add at least 1 litres worth of wort before pitching my yeast, but actually in this case, due to a distraction of a phone call, this one was added later than usual. No big deal here though, just to be clear. So in goes the Verdant IPA yeast, and I then transferred more wort on top to rehydrate the yeast with wort. When fermenting this recipe with Verdant IPA yeast, I strongly recommend a fermentation temperature of 23 degrees Celsius or approximately 73 degrees Fahrenheit. This not only allows for those wonderful apricot, peach and tropical flavours and aromas to shine, but it also assists this yeast in finishing quicker. Do be aware that this yeast is very well known to be fast at the beginning of fermentation but gets slower as it progresses. A little extra patience at the end is required here despite this higher fermentation temperature. However, you can speed this up by using pressure fermentation. The process here should be not to use pressure at all for the first 4 days of active fermentation, as this will allow the esters and aromas to form, and then after this point you may add up to 1 bar or 14.5 psi worth of pressure. However, I personally never go past 12 psi, which is the equivalent of 0.83 bars. The reason for this is I have noticed a better result in this lower region, and frankly there is little need or reason to apply more pressure than this. Also keep in mind that yeast, just like us in general, is not too fond of pressure, so minimal amounts for the best result are key, rather than seeing what you can get away with before killing your yeast. Once your fermentation has reached the point of having just 5 to 10 gravity points left, I would recommend that you then add in your dry hops. I suggest that you have a maximum contact time of 5 days, but 3 days is actually plenty enough. I have tried all methods of dry hopping, but frankly nothing so far has had as good results, and there is no need to buy a book either. The very most important thing here is to keep things clean and sanitary, so here is a guide to doing that in a way that has never failed me so far in hundreds of brews. In this example I'm going to use a hop sock, but the procedure is similar with other container types. This starts with boiling the bag. I strongly recommend doing this no matter if the bag has been previously used and cleaned, or if it's a brand new one straight out of the packaging. I then add this bag into a clean container and add sanitizer as a further safeguard. This will be the same container that I used to load the hops into. Once the sanitizer has had at least 3 minutes contact time, then this is then removed. After this point, I then wash and sanitize my hands, and this is repeated if I need to touch the bag after touching anything that is not clean and sanitary. These are very important steps to avoid contamination, which is all too common when it comes to homebrewers making IPAs because of this step. I then carefully add the dry hops with the bag lining the container, being sure that nothing touches the bag except for the hops. Once you have loaded all of your hops into the bag, then be sure to tie a nice strong knot to keep all of the hops contained. This loosely fitting hop bag, so there is room to expand, can now be added into your fermenter. Let's now look at the end beer from this actual brew, along with my tasting notes, starting with a close-up look at the pour, and then the same pour with a focus on the full glass. As you can see, the beer is quite a hazy gold on the pour, but a hazy orange in bulk in the glass with a fresh white head. I do not feel like my camera has done this beer colour justice really, and as usual I have made no attempts to clear the beer, as I prefer this natural hazy look, but hey, the choice is of course yours. At the point that you see the beer here, it has been in the keg for about 2 weeks. This beer has been under 12 psi of pressure, which is 0.83 bars for this time, and I'm using this pressure for serving too. Here are my tasting notes, starting with aroma. The aroma found here is very tropical and citrus and is mostly led by passion fruit and soft pineapple. Flavour. The early entry here is light and easy drinking, and there is a real mix of tropical and regular fruit that to many is led by passion fruit, peach and pineapple. As you gradually find your way down the glass, more flavours are discovered, including grapefruit, mango and orange, plus tangerine, which enhance the citrus side of this beer. The finish is nice and easy and not as bitter as the BUGU might suggest. Here are some of my notes on this one. This beer is super easy drinking and was designed to be so without any real bitterness bite. The design is also promoting lots of different tropical fruit flavours, which is certainly helped greatly by the use of Nectaron hops. My final impression for this one is that this is a very easy drinking yet quite complex mix of hoppy fruit flavours that make this pale ale something different yet familiar due to the hop pairing. This makes it fresh and interesting and also a nice crowd pleaser. If you do brew this one and are happy to share your tasting notes, then I would be very grateful if you could do so in the comments section of this video. Cheers. I do hope that you found this video useful, informative and interesting. If so, why not consider liking and subscribing? For further support you can join the channel's Facebook group, and if you would like to support the channel then check out the channel's merchandise store, as all profits go back into the channel. Until next time, happy brewing!